It was a night of elegance, a gala like no other. The room sparkled with the glint of chandeliers, the soft hum of expensive conversation filled the air, and waiters weaved between the well-dressed guests, offering trays of champagne. The event was held to raise money for charity, but to most of the attendees it felt more like a showcase of their wealth and status. Everyone was here to impress, to network, and to be seen. Amidst the glittering crowd was a woman, radiant in a designer gown, her laughter louder than most. She stood tall, confident, and in her eyes above it all. Her name was Victoria, a well-known socialite whose wealth seemed to flow endlessly from the privileges of her family's fortune. She had everything: beauty, power, and influence, and for the most part she used that power to look down on others. The elderly man she spotted across the room was no exception. He looked out of place in the sea of luxury, his suit slightly outdated, his hair graying and his posture a little stooped with age. But it was his skin that caught her attention first. His black skin, weathered by years of experience, seemed to stand out in a room filled with more polished and pristine faces. Victoria had made her way to the man with an almost predatory grace. She tilted her head, sizing him up as if he were some sort of curious artifact in the room. She offered a smile, though it was laced with mockery. The man, sitting alone at a table in the corner, looked up and saw her approach. There was a slight tension in his eyes, but he said nothing. He had been to these events before, where people like her would condescend, pretending to be kind while hiding their disdain. "Oh, I did not expect to see someone like you here," Victoria said, her voice sugary sweet but dripping with sarcasm. "Are you here to make a donation? Or perhaps just to enjoy the food?" She looked down at his plate, as though evaluating whether he belonged in the same room as the rest of them. The guests nearby stopped talking, sensing the drama about to unfold. Victoria leaned in a little closer, almost tauntingly. "It must be quite a change for you, to be around such important people." The elderly man said nothing, his eyes, calm but weary, as if he had seen all this before. The laughter of the room continued as if they were all part of the show. But Victoria could not let it go. She pressed on, her words now sharper, cutting deeper. "Tell me, what's your story? Did you used to be someone, or did you just get lucky finding yourself in this crowd?" The words hung in the air, cutting through the festive atmosphere like a knife. The elderly man finally looked up at her, his expression unreadable. He opened his mouth, as if preparing to say something, but just as he began to speak, the sound of the ballroom doors opening sharply interrupted. All eyes turned as a tall, commanding figure entered the room. His presence was immediate, and there was a sudden shift in the atmosphere, as if the whole room collectively held its breath. It was a man, and he was nothing like Victoria had expected. His tailored suit, sharp and precise, seemed to carry a weight of authority, but it was not just his appearance that drew attention. His eyes, dark and piercing, scanned the room with a certain intensity, and when they landed on the elderly man, the shift in his demeanor was unmistakable. Victoria, still unaware of the connection, couldn't help but glance at him. There was something about him, something that commanded respect without uttering a word. She watched, intrigued, as the man's gaze locked with the elderly man in the corner. Then, with a steady, calm voice that cut through the silence, the man spoke. "Father, I see you've been causing a bit of a stir." His voice was deep, filled with an underlying respect, and his words carried weight. The elderly man smiled softly, his face lighting up at the sight of the figure before him. Victoria, taken aback, blinked in confusion. "Father?" This man, standing before them with such grace and authority, was the son of the elderly man she had so callously mocked just moments before. She had thought nothing of him, assuming him to be just another, aging, forgotten relic of the past. But now, as she watched the interaction unfold, a sinking feeling settled in her stomach. The younger man turned his attention back to her, his gaze unwavering. "Victoria," he said, his tone cool, yet his eyes were sharp. "I believe you have something you want to say to my father." Victoria's smile faltered, and the room seemed to hold its breath, the tension palpable. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room now on her, waiting for her next move. Her mind raced, but the words she had so easily thrown at the elderly man moments ago seemed to vanish in the face of this unexpected revelation. The silence stretched on, unbearable and thick. What was happening? The balance of power had shifted so quickly that she was unsure of what to do next. Was this man truly his son? The man she had mocked so cruelly? Was he really someone important? Someone of worth? As the seconds passed, the air seemed to thicken with anticipation. The eyes of the room glued to the scene. What would Victoria do now? Would she apologize? Or would she double down, trying to regain some sense of control? The answers were unclear, but one thing was certain. Victoria had underestimated the man before her and in doing so, had opened the door to something far greater than she could have ever anticipated. The room fell into a heavy silence, leaving only the weight of the moment and the lingering question of what would happen next. Would this confrontation change everything? Would the son of the man she had mocked expose her for the cruel person she truly was? Or would she find a way to maintain her carefully constructed image, no matter the cost? The story, it seemed, was just beginning. The silence in the room seemed to stretch for an eternity, the air thick with tension. Victoria's smile, once so confident, began to falter as she searched the face of the man before her, trying to piece together some explanation for the situation she found herself in. His presence was magnetic, the weight of his authority heavy, in the air, and yet there was no arrogance in his stance, no boastfulness in his eyes. Instead, there was a quiet intensity, a calm assurance that left no room for doubt. He wasn't someone to be dismissed or mocked. She glanced at the elderly man sitting at the table, who now seemed to radiate an unexpected calm. The old man's face, once tense and wary under the sting of her words, had softened. He looked up at his son with an expression that spoke of pride, a deep love, and perhaps a sense of gratitude that Victoria could not understand. It was clear that whatever relationship they shared, it was one built on mutual respect, something that was completely absent from the interaction Victoria had initiated moments before. Victoria, still reeling from the unexpected turn of events, tried to regain some control over the situation. She wasn't used to being out of her element, and the icy gaze of the younger man only intensified her discomfort. She had built her reputation on knowing how to handle herself in any crowd, and now in front of everyone she felt like she was losing her footing. She laughed nervously, a high-pitched sound that only made the room feel colder. "Well, it seems we have some family dynamics to unpack here," she said, forcing a smile. But her words lacked conviction, and the effort to remain in control only made her appear more uncomfortable. The younger man, who had yet to introduce himself, didn't flinch. His gaze didn't waver, and the guests around them, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, fell into a hushed silence. All eyes were on the three of them now, on the elderly man, the son, and the woman who had so carelessly mocked someone she didn't understand. Victoria stood there, her confidence shaken. She had assumed she could control this space. After all, she had done it countless times before. But this was different. She couldn't quite grasp the depths of what she had just walked into, and that unnerved her. The elderly man finally spoke, his voice steady and calm, a stark contrast to the earlier mockery Victoria had aimed at him. "You're right, Victoria," he said, his eyes now shifting from his son to her. "We do have a lot to talk about, but I do not believe this is the right time or place for it. Perhaps we can continue this conversation elsewhere." There was no bitterness in his voice, no anger, only the quiet wisdom of someone who had seen far more of life than Victoria could ever hope to understand. Victoria blinked in surprise. This was not the response she had expected. She was used to people being uncomfortable, backing away, perhaps stammering through an apology. But the elderly man's words held none of that. There was a quiet power in his tone, something that immediately set him apart from the people she usually encountered at such events. "Now," the younger man said, breaking the silence once again, "I believe it's time we introduced ourselves properly." He took a step forward, extending his hand toward Victoria. "My name is Marcus. This," he gestured toward the elderly man, is my father, Elias." Victoria's hand hovered in the air, caught between reflexive politeness and the strange realization that Marcus's words weren't just a formality. He was announcing something that could shift the way the entire room viewed them and possibly her. Elias. The name echoed in her mind, but she couldn't place it. She had been in these circles long enough to recognize the significance of names, but nothing about this moment fit into her usual script. She took Marcus's hand, still unsure of how to navigate this new terrain. The warmth in his handshake contrasted with the chill in her spine. "Victoria," she said, her voice suddenly smaller, more fragile than she intended. "It's a pleasure to meet you." Marcus smiled, but there was a flicker in his eyes, something sharp, something like recognition. "I'm sure it is," he said, his voice even, though she couldn't quite decipher his tone. There was something almost amused in the way he spoke, as if he had already seen this play out 1,000 times before and was merely watching it unfold once more. Elias, ever the quiet observer, didn't speak immediately. Instead, he studied Victoria for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if weighing something far deeper than what had just transpired between them. The guests around them, sensing the importance of the conversation, slowly began to resume their own activities, though the whispers had already started. It was clear that they were witnessing something far more than a mere exchange of words. They were seeing a shift in power, one that would ripple through the evening and beyond. Victoria, despite herself, felt the weight of Elias's gaze. There was something in the way he looked at her, something that made her uncomfortable. It was as though he could see right through the mask she had so carefully crafted, like he knew exactly who she was without needing any introductions. It was an unsettling feeling. Marcus turned slightly, his attention momentarily diverted to the crowd. "It seems we're attracting some attention, Father," he said, a subtle grin tugging at his lips. Elias only nodded, his expression unreadable. Victoria glanced around the room, her discomfort growing with each passing second. The attention had indeed shifted. Her earlier confidence now seemed hollow, and the guests who had once looked at her with admiration now seemed to regard her with something different. It wasn't pity, nor was it disdain. It was something far more dangerous. Curiosity. And curiosity was the last thing she wanted right now. Elias's voice broke the silence once more, this time quieter, as though speaking only for Victoria's ears. "You have no idea who we are, do you?" Victoria froze, the question cutting through her like a blade. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Of course, she had no idea who they were. The name Elias meant nothing to her, and Marcus's presence only raised more questions. She had made assumptions based on appearances, based on the way the elderly man had looked, the way he had sat alone in the corner. But she had been wrong, hadn't she? Elias's eyes seemed to pierce through her hesitation, reading her like an open book. "You see, Victoria," he continued, his voice low but steady, "not all wealth is measured by what you can see with your eyes. Some of us have learned the hard way that true power doesn't need to be paraded around in the open. It waits, quietly, for the right moment to make itself known." Victoria swallowed hard, the weight of his words sinking in. What was he saying? Who was he really? The question swirled in her mind, but before she could respond, Marcus spoke again, his tone smooth, almost like a challenge. "You've made a mistake," Marcus said, his voice laced with an almost tangible coldness. "But I'm sure you'll realize that soon enough." The room seemed to pulse with the unspoken tension. Victoria's heart raced as she looked at both of them, trying to understand what was happening. What mistake had she made? And why did it feel as though the night had just shifted completely out of her control? And as the seconds stretched into an uncomfortable silence, Victoria realized she was in over her head.